I am Carter, and I am 26 years old. 2 years ago, I walked into the home I paid for with my own blood and sweat, only to catch my own brother in my bed with my fiancée. That level of betrayal is enough to destroy any normal man. But the absolute nightmare I was subjected to only started there. When I confronted my family about this ultimate, sickening betrayal, my mother actually looked me directly in the eye, wrapped her arms around the woman who had just shattered my life, and said, "You have to understand, Carter. Your brother is incredibly sensitive. They have a connection you couldn't possibly give her." In the ultimate act of humiliation, my parents literally moved my cheating ex-fiancé into his bedroom that very same day. They invited her entire family over for our traditional Thanksgiving dinner to celebrate their brand new relationship, laughing, drinking wine, and passing the gravy while I stood there in the dining room, entirely erased from my own life. But there is one thing my family did not know. While they were busy playing happy family, taking out loans, and planning my brother's lavish wedding with my ex-fiancé, I had quietly secured a high-level executive promotion at a major real estate investment firm. And more importantly, I had just legally acquired the massive debt portfolio tied directly to my parents' mortgage. They were sitting comfortably in a house that I now entirely owned, and they had absolutely no idea about the absolute hellfire that was about to rain down on them. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little delusion, weaponized the law, and took everything they valued, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now if you believe that karma always comes to collect its debts. And do not forget to let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Now, let us go back to the exact moment my entire reality was shattered into a million pieces. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I remember the weather perfectly because it was the kind of crisp, clear spring day where you falsely believe absolutely nothing could go wrong. At the time, I was working as a senior project manager for a major commercial construction company. I was managing a massive site downtown. We were supposed to pour the concrete foundation for a new corporate complex, but a catastrophic supply chain issue delayed our materials delivery. My boss, seeing that we were at a complete standstill, told me to take the rest of the afternoon off. Normally, I would have stayed at the office. I would have caught up on my salary reports, reviewed our real estate zoning permits, or drafted up the upcoming contractor payments. I was a workaholic, driven by a desperate need to secure my financial future. But that day, I thought I would do something genuinely nice. I thought I would surprise my fiancée, Vanessa. Vanessa was completing her student teaching practicum at a local elementary school. I figured I could pick up some lunch from that little Italian place she loved, drive over, and we could spend a rare afternoon together. I had been working grueling 60-hour weeks, putting every spare dollar into a high-yield savings account to pay for our upcoming wedding and pad our joint college fund for the kids we planned to have. I was exhausted. My boots were covered in construction dust, but I was happy. I pulled my truck into the driveway of our house around 1 in the afternoon. The house was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial I had purchased just a year prior. Right away, my stomach did a strange knot. Something felt inherently off. My younger brother Wyatt's beat-up silver sedan was parked practically on my front lawn. My parents had bought him that piece of junk for his 21st birthday, completely disregarding the fact that he had already wrecked 2 other vehicles because he was constantly driving under the influence. Wyatt was supposed to be working his part-time shift at a local independent music store, a pathetic minimum wage job my mother had practically begged the owner to give him. I figured maybe he was on his lunch break too. Maybe he was dropping off the lawnmower he had borrowed 3 months ago and never returned. I grabbed my lunch bags, walked up the front steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The house was dead quiet, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But then, I heard a very faint sound coming from the second floor. It was music. Specifically, it was All of Me by John Legend. The exact song Vanessa and I had chosen, just 3 weeks prior, for our first dance at our wedding reception. I set the food down on the kitchen counter. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my heavy work boots making soft thuds against the floorboards. Halfway up the staircase, my hand brushed against something draped carelessly over the wooden banister. It was a gray cashmere cardigan. It was the exact sweater I had bought Vanessa for Christmas. 2 steps later, lying in a crumpled heap on the landing, I saw a faded vintage band t-shirt that I instantly recognized as Wyatt's. My heart started hammering against my ribs. It was heavy, cold, and frantic. Every survival instinct in my biological makeup screamed at me to turn around, to walk out the front door, to get back into my truck and drive far away. My brain was desperately trying to formulate any logical, innocent excuse for why their clothes were scattered on my stairs. But I kept walking. I reached the landing. I walked down the short hallway. I stood in front of the closed door of the master bedroom. I reached out, grabbed the brass doorknob, and pushed the door open. I am not going to give you the graphic, dirty details. You are mature adults and you know exactly what I saw. What I will tell you is that they were so completely, aggressively wrapped up in each other on the premium mattress I had purchased with 3 months of my hard-earned salary, that they did not even hear the heavy wooden door creak open. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. Time completely suspended itself. The sheer disrespect, the absolute violation of my personal sanctuary, was physically suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in my own bedroom. When Wyatt finally noticed me standing there, the look on his face was not one of sheer terror. It was not the devastated face of a man who realized he had just completely destroyed his older brother's life. He simply pulled the white duvet cover up slightly, looked at me with this irritatingly calm, almost bored expression, and said, "Oh, bro." Vanessa, however, immediately started screaming. It was not a scream of fear or remorse. It was a high-pitched, theatrical wail of a woman who just realized her comfortable, fully funded free ride was officially over. She scrambled backward against the headboard, pulling the sheets tightly around her neck, repeating, "Oh God, Carter, oh God," over and over again like a broken record. Wyatt just sat there. He actually looked somewhat relieved. He had this disgusting smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, like he was glad the dirty little secret was finally out in the open, so he did not have to hide in the shadows anymore. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not throw a single punch, even though my hands were balled into fists so tight my fingernails were cutting deep crescent moons into my palms. The anger inside me was so absolute, so incredibly cold, that it bypassed rage and turned into a terrifying clinical silence. I just stared at them with absolute, unadulterated disgust. I turned around, walked down the stairs, walked out the front door, and went to sit in my truck. My hands were shaking so violently I could not even put the key in the ignition. I sat there in the driveway for a full hour, staring blankly at the steering wheel. Eventually, the front door slowly opened. Wyatt came scurrying out like a cowardly rat running from the kitchen light. He did not even look in the direction of my truck. He just threw his clothes on, threw himself into his beat-up car, started the sputtering engine, and sped off down the residential street, running a stop sign in his panic. A few minutes later, Vanessa walked out onto the front porch. She was wearing her thick winter robe, tears streaming down her flushed face, her expensive mascara completely ruined and running down her cheeks. She looked pathetic. I slowly opened my truck door, stepped out, and walked up the concrete pathway. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. I looked her dead in the eye, and I asked one single quiet question. "How long?" She immediately started deflecting, waving her hands in the air. She talked rapidly about how things are so complicated, how human emotions are messy and unpredictable, how she never meant to hurt me, how they just found themselves in a highly emotional situation they couldn't control. "How long, Vanessa?" I asked again, cutting through her nonsense. My voice was completely devoid of any human emotion. She choked on a massive sob, looking down at her bare feet on the cold porch wood. 2 years. 2 years. My brain instantly did the devastating math. 2 years ago was exactly when I started taking double shifts at the construction site. It was exactly when I started working weekend side jobs to save up the thousands of dollars I needed for her custom diamond engagement ring. Every single Saturday I spent sweating under the brutal summer sun, pouring concrete, dealing with screaming contractors, destroying my lower back so I could build a beautiful, secure future for our hypothetical children. She was with my brother. Every single time she told me she had to stay late at the school to grade papers. Every time she went over to my parents' house to help my mother plant flowers in her garden. She was with him. She actually had the utter audacity to try and explain herself right there on the porch. She told me that she and Wyatt developed deep feelings over time. She said they shared a profound, spiritual connection through indie music and abstract art that she and I simply did not possess. She looked me in the eye and told me I was always too focused on money, on building my real estate portfolio, on my career progression, and Wyatt understood her soul. I did not argue with her. I did not debate the value of my hard work versus my brother's laziness. I just pointed a finger down the street. I told her she had exactly until sunset to pack every single item she owned and get out of my house. She started crying louder, dropping to her knees, begging for a proper conversation, pleading for us to go to couples counseling. I turned my back on her, walked back to my truck, and drove straight to the local hardware store. I bought the most expensive, heavy-duty deadbolts they had in stock for every door in the house. By the time I returned, her car was gone. She had left a pathetic, tear-stained, 5-page handwritten letter on the kitchen island, detailing her journey of emotional self-discovery. I picked it up, walked over to the trash can, and threw it directly into the garbage without reading past the first agonizingly dramatic paragraph. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of hypervigilance. I changed every password to every account I owned. I secured my bank accounts, locked down my credit with all 3 bureaus, and completely severed our shared phone plan. As I sat in the dark, empty living room that night, staring at the empty spaces on the walls where her pictures used to hang, a sickening, terrifying realization washed over me. This was not just a random act of betrayal. This was the inevitable culmination of a toxic dynamic that had been brewing in my family for my entire life. The seeds for this destruction were planted decades ago. To truly understand how my own flesh and blood could facilitate something so profoundly evil, you have to understand the absolute psychological nightmare of growing up in my childhood home. On paper, we were the American dream. My mother, Brenda, is a master manipulator. To the outside world, to our neighbors and the community, she is the perfect suburban housewife. She is the woman who bakes organic cookies for the neighborhood block party, organizes the charity drives, and serves aggressively on the HOA committee. But behind closed doors, she is a deeply toxic, narcissistic woman who thrives entirely on maintaining absolute control and strategically pitting her children against each other for her own amusement. My father, Gregory, is a chronic coward. He knew exactly what my mother was doing to our psychological development our entire lives, but he consciously chose to keep his head down, read his newspaper, and avoid conflict rather than stand up to her tyranny. And then there is Wyatt. Wyatt, or as I like to call him, Tristan in his little artist fantasy world. Wyatt was the golden child. From the exact moment he was born, the sun miraculously rose and set in his messy bedroom. He could do absolutely no wrong in Brenda's eyes. If Wyatt broke an expensive antique vase in the living room, it was because the vase was placed in a bad spot that restricted his physical freedom. If Wyatt failed a basic high school math test, it was because the public school teacher did not understand his unique, highly sensitive learning style. I, on the exact opposite hand, was the designated workhorse. I was the scapegoat. I was expected to be flawless, highly responsible, and completely self-sufficient from a terrifyingly young age. By the time I was 16 years old, while my peers were going to pool parties and playing video games, I was working grueling summer jobs at local construction sites. I was hauling heavy lumber, laying brick in the blistering heat, and inhaling drywall dust just to buy my own school clothes and slowly build a meager college fund. I knew very early on that my parents were never going to contribute a single dime to my education. Wyatt, however, got to spend his entire adolescence and early adulthood in my parents' finished basement. He smoked weed, played video games until 4 a.m, and confidently told everyone at family gatherings that he was going to be a famous musician. My mother fully, enthusiastically funded his entire parasitic lifestyle. Whenever I dared to complain about the blatant, suffocating inequality in our household, Brenda would give me this condescending, pitiful smile. "Carter, darling," she would say, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "You are so strong. You are so naturally capable and resilient. Wyatt is fragile. He is highly sensitive. He has an artist's soul, and the corporate world is very harsh on delicate people like him. He needs a soft place to land. You should be proud to be the strong older brother." I busted my absolute tail through a difficult university program. I took out massive student loans, worked night shifts as a security guard, and eventually graduated with top honors and a degree in construction management. I immediately aggressively networked and landed a highly competitive, solid corporate job. I was building a real life. I was contributing to a 401k. I was managing a stock portfolio. I was planning a future. Wyatt, predictably, dropped out of the local community college after exactly 3 weeks. His official excuse was that the professors were stifling his creative boundaries and forcing him into a capitalist box. He immediately moved back into my parents' basement, rent-free, with absolutely no expectations placed upon him. When I finally met Vanessa, I genuinely thought I had found my life partner. She seemed incredibly grounded. She came from a respectable upper-middle-class family. She was working diligently toward a solid career in public education, and she talked enthusiastically about wanting the exact same things I did. A nice house in a quiet suburb, 2 reliable cars in the driveway, and a couple of kids playing in the backyard. I introduced her to my family. Looking back now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, the warning signs were flashing neon red from the very first dinner. Brenda instantly attached herself to Vanessa, but not in the normal, welcoming way a mother loves a future daughter-in-law. She loved Vanessa because she saw her as a shiny new toy. Because I was working so many demanding hours to fund our lifestyle, pay down my student loans, and save for our extravagant wedding, I could not always attend the random Tuesday night family dinners my mother loved to mandate. Instead of rescheduling for a weekend when I was available, Brenda would insist that Vanessa come alone. "You are family now, sweetheart," my mother would coo over the phone. "You do not need Carter to be here to spend quality time with us. Come over, we'll drink wine and chat." I thought it was nice. I thought she was just trying to build a bond. I was a complete, utter fool. My mother started intentionally, maliciously setting up situations for Vanessa and Wyatt to be entirely alone together. I would come home utterly exhausted from a 14-hour shift at a difficult job site, covered in concrete dust and sweat, and Vanessa would excitedly tell me about this amazing, deep conversation she had with Wyatt about obscure European indie films. My mother would constantly make little insidious comments when I was around. She would sit in her armchair, watch Wyatt and Vanessa laughing together on the sofa, and say loudly, "It is just so wonderful how you two naturally get each other. You have the exact same vibrant sense of humor. Carter is always so serious, isn't he?" At the time, I just thought my family was finally getting along. But it was a highly calculated psychological campaign. Brenda never liked the fact that I was financially successful and emotionally independent because she could not manipulate or control me. She controlled Wyatt entirely through financial handouts and emotional coddling. She saw Vanessa as a prize, and she slowly, methodically started convincing both Vanessa and Wyatt that they were tragic soulmates trapped in the wrong circumstances. The most sickening piece of this entire puzzle fell into place in my memory as I sat alone in my empty, dark house the night I kicked Vanessa out. 2 years ago, there was a massive 3-day outdoor indie music festival happening a few states over. Vanessa desperately wanted to go. I had originally planned to take paid time off work, buy the expensive VIP tickets, and drive her down there. But exactly a week before the festival, a massive commercial project at my firm hit a critical, unexpected deadline. My boss was desperate. He offered me triple overtime pay and a guaranteed bonus to stay behind and manage the emergency crew over the weekend. I was incredibly torn. I wanted to make Vanessa happy, but the money would essentially pay for the catering at our wedding. I made the mistake of discussing this dilemma with my mother. Brenda pulled me aside in her kitchen, placing her hands on my shoulders, and gave me this incredibly maternal, deeply caring look. "Carter, honey, you have to be responsible. You have to focus on your career. This promotion means everything for your financial future. Do not risk your professional reputation for a silly, loud concert. Wyatt has absolutely nothing to do this weekend. Let him drive Vanessa down there. It will be a fun bonding experience for them, and you can work without feeling guilty." I foolishly agreed. I gave Wyatt $500 in cash for the gas, and I paid for their hotel room so he could take my girlfriend to a music festival, while I stayed behind and worked in the scorching heat to pay for her diamond engagement ring. I found out later, from the timeline Vanessa confessed to, that specific weekend, in the exact hotel room I paid for with my overtime money, was the very first time they slept together. My mother knew. I realized with absolute, horrifying certainty that Brenda absolutely knew. She practically bought them the condoms. She orchestrated the entire affair because she wanted her golden child to have everything he desired, even if it meant destroying my life to give it to him. The morning after I kicked Vanessa out of the house, I called my boss. I told him I was dealing with a severe personal emergency and needed a few days of unpaid leave. I did not explain the humiliating details. I just needed to breathe, to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. I assumed that Vanessa had gone crawling back to her parents' house in absolute shame to face the music. I assumed that my family, upon inevitably hearing the news of what happened, would be utterly horrified and disgusted by Wyatt's monstrous behavior. I expected my phone to ring at any moment with my father expressing his outrage, and my mother crying, profusely apologizing for my brother's unforgivable actions. I was completely, utterly delusional. My younger sister, Fiona, was the only person in my entire bloodline who called me. Fiona had always been the quiet, anxious observer in our family dynamic. She saw the blatant favoritism. She saw the psychological manipulation. But she was entirely too terrified of Brenda's wrath to ever speak up or defend me. She called me that afternoon, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Carter," she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible, like someone was listening at her bedroom door. "Are you sitting down?" "What is it, Fiona?" I asked, my voice flat. "Carter, Vanessa is here. She is at Mom and Dad's house." I gripped the phone so hard the plastic casing actually creaked. "What do you mean she is there? Why the hell would she go there?" Fiona started crying softly. "She came here late last night after you kicked her out. She bypassed her own parents and drove straight to Mom. She sat at the kitchen island and told Mom everything. Carter, Mom hugged her. Mom rubbed her back and told her that sometimes the universe works in mysterious, complicated ways, and that true, authentic love cannot be denied by societal rules." I felt all the blood rapidly drain from my face. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. My own mother. "Where is she sleeping right now, Fiona?" I asked, though the sickening knot in my gut already knew the grotesque answer. Mom helped her carry her suitcases upstairs. She moved her into Wyatt's room. "Your old bedroom, Carter. They are staying together under Mom's roof." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The level of betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly deep, that it completely transcended human anger. It was pure, unadulterated evil. My mother had taken the woman who just destroyed my life, the woman who had spent 2 years humiliating me and laughing behind my back, and welcomed her into her home with open arms. She didn't just welcome her. She validated the affair. She rewarded them. For the next several months, I went absolute, strict no contact with my parents and my brother. I blocked their numbers. I routed their emails directly to my spam folder. I focused entirely, obsessively on my job. I worked like a relentless machine, taking on every complicated commercial real estate project the company had to offer. I was actively numbing the agonizing pain with sheer, brutal productivity. But as the winter holidays rapidly approached, the heavy societal pressure of family tradition began to creep in. My mother started leaving voicemails on my work phone. They were never apologies. Brenda was constitutionally incapable of apologizing. "Carter, it is your mother." The messages would begin, her tone dripping with manufactured, fake concern. "We miss you terribly. It is time for you to let go of this stubborn anger. Holding on to toxic grudges is only hurting your own soul. We are hosting our big traditional Thanksgiving dinner, and as the eldest son, we expect you to be there. We need to heal as a family. Don't be selfish. Against my absolute better judgment, against every single screaming alarm bell in my head, I decided to go. I thought maybe, just maybe, seeing the physical toll this had taken on me in person would snap them back to reality. I thought my father, Gregory, would finally look at his broken son and find the courage to stand up and be a man. I thought Wyatt would at least have the basic human decency to look ashamed in my presence. I drove to their house on Thanksgiving afternoon. The weather was bitterly cold. I parked my truck down the street, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked up the familiar concrete driveway. I pushed open the front door. The house was overwhelmingly warm, and the rich smell of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and cinnamon filled the air. It smelled exactly like my childhood. It smelled like safety. I took off my coat and walked into the formal dining room. The scene before me literally made my stomach violently turn over. Sitting right at the head of the long oak table, laughing loudly and holding hands in plain view of everyone, were Wyatt and Vanessa. Vanessa was wearing a beautiful, expensive burgundy dress. Wyatt was wearing a crisp button-down shirt that I knew for a fact my mother had carefully ironed for him. And sitting right across from them, drinking expensive red wine and smiling broadly, were Vanessa's parents. The entire room went dead, terrifyingly silent the exact moment I crossed the threshold. Everyone stopped talking and stared at me. My mother immediately stood up from her chair, completely unfazed, holding a porcelain gravy boat. "Carter, you made it!" she exclaimed brightly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She gestured casually to a cheap metal folding chair that had been squeezed into the far corner of the table, as far away from the center of attention as physically possible. "Come sit down. We are just about to serve the appetizers." I looked at my father. Gregory immediately dropped his gaze, looking down at his empty plate, suddenly intensely fascinated by the pattern on his linen napkin. I looked at Vanessa's parents. They actually had the unmitigated nerve to give me tight, sympathetic, pitying smiles, like I was a sick dog they felt sorry for. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous, and vibrating with suppressed rage. My mother sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes slightly, playing the practiced role of the exhausted, patient peacemaker. "Carter, please, I am begging you, do not make a scene on a holiday." Wyatt and Vanessa have formally announced their committed relationship. Vanessa's parents are here to celebrate their union. Love is a beautiful, unstoppable thing, and we all have to accept that they were simply meant for each other. You need to be the bigger person here and support your brother. They had entirely replaced me. They had literally taken my fiancée, handed her over to my unemployed brother, and seamlessly, effortlessly replaced me at the family dining table. They expected me to sit quietly in a folding chair and eat dry turkey, while the man who stole my future held hands with the woman who lied to me for 2 years. I did not scream. I did not flip the table or shatter the wine glasses. I realized in that exact crystal-clear moment that these people were not my family. They were a toxic cult, and my mother was the supreme leader. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any warmth. I turned around, walked out the front door, and let it slam shut behind me. I got into my truck and drove to a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I bought a black coffee and a cheap burger, sitting alone in my freezing truck while the rest of the country celebrated gratitude with their loved ones. And right there, under the flickering, depressing fluorescent light of the golden arches, I made a final, absolute decision. I was not just going to walk away and let them win. I was going to completely disappear, build an untouchable empire, and one day, I would return to watch their entire house of cards burn to the ground. I pulled out my cell phone and called Marcus. Marcus was a guy I worked closely with on the construction sites, a former military contractor who took absolutely zero nonsense from anyone and asked no questions. He was the most loyal guy I knew. "Hey," I said when he picked up on the second ring. I need a massive favor. Tonight. Name it, boss, Marcus said immediately. I need to pack up my entire house. Everything I own. I need to be completely gone before the sun comes up. Marcus didn't hesitate. I've got the heavy-duty truck and moving straps. Give me 20 minutes. That night, Marcus and I stripped my house down to the bare drywall. I packed my clothes, my expensive electronics, my tools, my files. Anything Vanessa had left behind. Shoes, books, decorations. I threw into heavy black contractor garbage bags and tossed directly into the filthy dumpster behind a local strip mall. I scrubbed my life completely clean. The next morning, I walked into my local bank branch the second the manager unlocked the glass doors. I withdrew every single penny from my savings and checking accounts in cashier's checks, closing the accounts permanently. I walked into a mobile phone store, aggressively canceled my contract, handed them my old phone, and bought a brand new device with a new number that was completely untethered from my family's shared plan. I permanently deleted all my social media accounts. I became a total ghost. But I didn't just run away blindly. A week prior, my company's CEO had offered me a massive promotion to oversee a new, highly lucrative division in Texas. The starting salary was nearly double my current pay, plus aggressive stock options and a generous relocation package. I had initially told him I needed time to think about it because of Vanessa. I called him from my new phone as I drove out of the state limits. I told him I accepted the VP position, and I would be in the Texas office on Monday morning. Arriving in Texas felt exactly like stepping onto a different, much cleaner planet. There were absolutely no ghosts of my past haunting these streets. No familiar coffee shops where I used to sit with Vanessa and plan our wedding. No local grocery stores where my mother held court, spreading her toxic gossip to the neighbors. There was only relentless heat, endless concrete, and massive opportunity. I threw myself entirely into my new role as Vice President of Regional Development at the real estate investment firm. I worked with a level of aggression and razor-sharp focus that honestly intimidated some of my new colleagues. My specific job was to identify struggling commercial properties and over-leveraged residential portfolios, acquire their massive debt from regional banks at a discount, and ruthlessly restructure or liquidate them. I was incredibly, terrifyingly good at it. When you finally strip away the exhausting emotional baggage of managing a manipulative, parasitic family, it is genuinely amazing how much mental clarity and energy you have at your disposal. Within a year and a half, I had completely, undeniably transformed my reality. I bought a sleek, modern penthouse apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. I upgraded my entire wardrobe to tailored suits. And, as a physical symbol of my absolute financial independence and victory, I walked into a high-end dealership and bought a midnight black Porsche 911, paying a massive chunk in cash. Every single time I gripped that premium leather steering wheel and heard the engine roar, I felt a surge of pure, untouchable pride. I was thousands of miles away from the pathetic, groveling existence my brother Wyatt lived, still rotting in my parents' basement, writing terrible songs while my ex-fiancée probably paid for his groceries. I was thriving professionally, but I was isolated. That is when I met Clara. Clara was a corporate consultant who worked in the high-rise building right next to mine. She was smart, incredibly beautiful, and seemed to have her entire life completely under control. We started dating, and for a few months it was surprisingly peaceful. She was a fantastic listener, always eager to hear about my day. One night, after a long dinner and a few glasses of expensive wine at my apartment, I finally opened up to her about my dark past. I told her the entire ugly truth about Wyatt, about Vanessa's betrayal, about my mother's horrific Thanksgiving dinner, and how I had completely severed ties with my bloodline. I fully expected her to be disgusted by their behavior. Instead, she got this strange, overly sympathetic, pitying look in her eyes. "Carter," she said softly, reaching across the island to stroke my arm. "That is so incredibly terrible. But you know, they are still your family. People make horrible mistakes when they are emotional. Holding onto this much anger is only hurting your own heart. Have you ever tried to just sit down like adults and talk to your mother?" I immediately, aggressively shut the conversation down. I set a firm, non-negotiable boundary right then and there. Clara, listen to me very carefully. I do not speak to them. I will never speak to them. That part of my life is dead and buried. Do not bring it up again. She nodded quickly and agreed to drop it. But I should have known better. I should have known that people who grew up in healthy, normal, loving environments literally cannot comprehend the absolute malice of a toxic family. They watch too many holiday movies and genuinely think every deep psychological dispute can be miraculously solved with a group hug and a tearful apology. Clara unfortunately suffered from a severe, misguided savior complex. She desperately wanted to be the beautiful angel who swooped in and miraculously healed the broken, wealthy man's family trauma. I didn't know it at the time, but Clara went completely behind my back. She secretly went through my home office desk while I was in the shower, found an old, filed tax document with my parents' Colorado address, and successfully tracked my mother down on social media. She initiated secret contact. Brenda, immediately sensing an easy, naive mark, spun a massive web of lies. She told Clara that I was a deeply troubled, confused young man who had entirely misunderstood a highly complicated romantic situation. She cried on the phone, telling Clara that she wept every single night missing her eldest son, and that the family was absolutely desperate to make amends. Clara fell for the manipulation completely, hook, line, and sinker. Then came the phone call that changed the trajectory of everything, accelerating the inevitable collision. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late October. I was sitting alone in my corner office, reviewing a massive, highly lucrative portfolio of distressed residential mortgages our firm was looking to aggressively acquire from a struggling Colorado regional bank. My private cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was an unknown number, but the caller ID showed the area code from my hometown. I hesitated for a long moment, then picked it up. Carter speaking. Carter. The voice on the other end was trembling, thick with heavy, choked tears. It was my Aunt Vivian, my mother's younger sister. Aunt Vivian was the only genuinely decent person in that entire genetic bloodline. A sweet, quiet woman who always sent me birthday cards with $20 bills and deliberately stayed out of Brenda's endless drama. Aunt Vivian? What is wrong? I asked, instantly standing up from my leather chair, my heart rate accelerating rapidly. Carter, oh God, Carter. It is your mother, she sobbed hysterically into the receiver. She collapsed yesterday in the kitchen. They took her to the hospital in an ambulance. Carter. They did scans. She has stage 4 breast cancer. The doctors said it has metastasized. It has spread everywhere. They gave her 3 months to live. Maybe less if the chemo doesn't hold it off. The solid floor seemed to completely drop out from underneath me. All the righteous anger, all the bitter hatred, all the massive emotional boundaries I had painstakingly built over the last 18 months evaporated into thin air in a single terrifying second. It is a horrifying reality of human nature. No matter how monstrous, how utterly abusive a parent is, the sudden thought of them dying an agonizing death still hits you like a runaway freight train. She is begging for you, Carter? Aunt Vivian cried, her breath hitching. She just wants to see you one last time before she goes. She wants to apologize. Please, I am begging you. Please come home. I didn't even go back to my apartment to pack a bag. I grabbed my wallet, my car keys, and walked straight out of the corporate office. I told my assistant to cancel absolutely all my meetings for the rest of the week, ran to my Porsche, drove to the airport at 90 miles an hour, and bought a first-class ticket on the first available flight back to Colorado. The entire 3-hour flight, I was in a state of suffocating emotional agony. I stared blankly out the small window at the clouds, desperately trying to remember the rare, fleeting moments from my childhood when Brenda was actually kind to me. I convinced myself that impending, terrifying death changes people. I convinced myself that facing the literal end of her life had finally made her realize the immense gravity of her sins, and she genuinely wanted to make peace. I was mentally preparing myself to forgive her. I was preparing myself to say a final goodbye to my mother. I rented an SUV at the airport and drove straight through the familiar streets to my parents' house. The driveway and the curb were packed with cars. My father's sedan, Wyatt's car, and several vehicles I didn't recognize. I assumed the extended family was gathering for a somber, tearful vigil. I walked up to the heavy oak front door. It was unlocked. I took a deep, shuddering breath, bracing myself to see the frail, dying skeletal shell of the woman who raised me. I pushed the door open and stepped into the living room. There was no mechanical hospital bed. There were no hissing oxygen tanks. There were no weeping relatives clutching tissues. Instead, the large living room was brightly decorated with silver and gold balloons. There was a massive, expensive catered buffet spread across the dining table. A huge, professionally printed banner hung across the brick fireplace that read, "Congratulations, Wyatt and Vanessa, on your engagement." And standing right in the center of the room, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, looking healthier, tanner, and more radiant than she had in a decade, was my mother. She turned and saw me standing frozen in the doorway. She didn't look shocked or guilty. She smiled, a triumphant, sickeningly sweet, victorious smile, and set her glass down. "Carter, you made it!" she exclaimed loudly, walking toward me with her arms open wide, ready for a hug. "I knew you would come. We couldn't possibly celebrate your brother's beautiful engagement without you here." I stood absolutely paralyzed. I looked frantically around the room. Wyatt was standing near the fireplace with his arms securely around Vanessa, who was proudly flashing a massive diamond ring at her friends. My father was standing in the corner by the kitchen, nervously adjusting his tie and refusing to make eye contact with me. My brain violently struggled to process the horrific reality of the situation. "Aunt Vivian," she called me. I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "She said you had stage 4 cancer. She said you were dying." My mother waved her hand dismissively, letting out a light, airy chuckle as if I had just told a mild joke. "Oh, Carter, you know exactly how dramatic your Aunt Vivian can be." She completely misunderstood a tiny little health scare. I had a benign, harmless cyst removed. But honestly, it was a blessing in disguise. It made me realize how terribly short life is, and how we cannot let silly, petty grudges keep our beautiful family apart. When Clara reached out and told me you stubbornly wouldn't return my calls, I knew we needed a strong incentive to finally get you in the same room as us. She had faked it. She had maliciously manipulated her own sister, faked terminal, stage 4 cancer, and weaponized my fundamental human empathy just to trick me into attending my cheating brother's engagement party. All so she could maintain her flawless image of a perfect, united family for the neighbors. I thought the absolute worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong, because the ultimate confrontation was only just beginning, and they had no idea that the man standing in their living room held the legal power to render them entirely homeless. I stood entirely frozen in the entryway of the house I grew up in, staring at the woman who had just weaponized the concept of terminal illness to force my attendance at a party. The sheer magnitude of my mother's deception hung in the air, thick and suffocating, mingling with the expensive scent of catered prime rib and garlic roasted potatoes. I looked around the room. There were at least 50 people crammed into the living room and formal dining area. These were our neighbors, extended relatives, and Vanessa's entire extended family. They were all holding crystal champagne flutes, wearing their Sunday best, completely oblivious to the absolute psychological warfare occurring right in front of them. My mother, Brenda, stood there radiating an aura of total, unshakable invincibility. She actually believed she had won. She firmly believed that by trapping me in a room full of people, leveraging societal expectations and public decorum, she could force me to submit to her reality. She thought I would simply swallow my pride, put on a fake smile, and congratulate the brother who had slept with my fiancée in my own bed. "Don't look so shocked, Carter," Brenda said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper meant only for me, even though she maintained her bright, camera-ready smile for the rest of the room. "I did what any good mother would do. I brought my family back together under one roof. Now take off your coat. Your father is by the bar, and we are going to do a formal toast in 15 minutes. I expect you to say a few words about how happy you are for Wyatt and Vanessa." I looked past her shoulder. Wyatt was standing near the grand stone fireplace. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit that I knew for an absolute fact he could not afford on a part-time minimum wage salary. His arm was wrapped possessively around Vanessa's waist. Vanessa was wearing a stunning white cocktail dress, looking every bit the blushing bride-to-be. She held her left hand up near her collarbone, purposefully catching the ambient light to show off the massive diamond engagement ring. It was the exact custom setting I had bookmarked on my laptop 2 years ago. My mother had clearly funded the entire purchase. My father, Gregory, was standing near the kitchen island, desperately trying to blend into the cabinetry. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, his eyes darting nervously between me and Brenda. He knew this was a terrible idea. He knew the cancer story was a monstrous lie. Yet, true to his lifelong cowardice, he had remained entirely silent, choosing the path of least resistance over the basic morality of protecting his eldest son. For the first time in my entire life, standing in that room, I did not feel a single shred of hurt. I did not feel the familiar, agonizing sting of rejection that had plagued my childhood. The intense, burning anger that had fueled my grueling 80-hour work weeks in Texas completely evaporated. It was replaced by a sensation of absolute, sub-zero clarity. I saw these people for exactly what they were. They were not a family. They were a collective of emotional parasites, and Brenda was the queen. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying my heart rate. I adjusted my grip on the heavy leather handle of my briefcase. I had carried this briefcase onto the plane, refusing to check it, because the documents inside were more valuable than anything I owned. "You faked having stage 4 breast cancer," I stated. My voice was not loud, but the sheer lack of emotion in my tone made Brenda blink rapidly. I did not phrase it as a question. I stated it as a permanent historical fact. "You manipulated Aunt Vivian into hysterical tears, knowing she would call me, just to get me to attend an engagement party." Brenda let out a short, dismissive sigh, waving her hand in the air as if she were swatting away an annoying fly. "Carter, you are being incredibly dramatic. I had a health scare. It made me reflect on what is truly important. What is important is unity. Wyatt has found his soulmate, and you have a highly successful career in Texas. Everyone ended up exactly where they belong. You need to let go of this toxic resentment and be a supportive older brother." Wyatt, noticing the tension, decided to strut over. He walked with this newfound, unearned confidence, Vanessa trailing closely behind him. He stopped a few feet from me, puffing out his chest. "Hey, bro," Wyatt said, using that exact same casual, disrespectful tone he had used the day I caught him in my bed. "Glad you could make it. Mom said you were acting pretty stubborn, but I told her you'd come around eventually. We're family, right? Blood is thicker than water." Vanessa finally met my eyes. She looked nervous, but there was a distinct glimmer of arrogance in her expression. She had secured her comfortable future. She had traded the hard-working older brother for the spoiled golden child, knowing full well that Brenda would endlessly fund their lifestyle. She thought she was entirely untouchable. "Hello, Carter," Vanessa said softly, using her best innocent teacher voice. "I hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for us. We just couldn't deny our connection." I looked at Wyatt, then at Vanessa, and finally at Brenda. I felt a slow, dark smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator realizing the trap had perfectly snapped shut on its prey. "I am not here to be a supportive brother," I said, my voice projecting slightly, carrying over the soft jazz music playing from the surround sound speakers. A few of the nearby guests stopped their conversations, turning to look at us. "And I am certainly not here to celebrate a relationship built on 2 years of deceit, betrayal, and absolute cowardice." Brenda's fake smile instantly vanished. Her eyes hardened into tiny, dark slits. "Carter, stop this right now. You are not going to ruin this beautiful day." I will not allow you to embarrass this family in front of our guests. You embarrassed this family the day you decided to reward infidelity. Brenda? I replied, deliberately using her first name. I saw my father flinch from across the room. You destroyed this family the day you handed my lying ex-fiancée the keys to my childhood bedroom. The music continued to play, but the conversations in the living room rapidly died down. The tension was palpable, a heavy, suffocating blanket descending over the wealthy crowd. People were exchanging uncomfortable glances, slowly stepping back to give us a wide berth. Vanessa's parents, standing near the fireplace, suddenly looked incredibly rigid and concerned. You listen to me? Wyatt stepped forward, trying to assert dominance, his face flushing a deep, angry red. This is my house. This is my engagement party. If you can't show basic respect, you can turn around and walk right back out that door. Your house? I asked, raising a single eyebrow. I let out a genuine, booming laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. The sheer absurdity of his statement was the perfect cue. Wyatt, you have never owned a single thing in your entire pathetic life. You are a 25-year-old unemployed man-child living in a basement, funded entirely by a mother who is secretly drowning in debt to maintain the illusion of your success. Brenda stepped forward, grabbing my forearm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my suit jacket. Carter, shut your mouth. Right now. Do not say another word. Take your hand off me, I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a level of icy authority that made her instantly release her grip and step back. I walked past them, making my way to the large, polished mahogany dining table that was covered in expensive catered hors d'oeuvres. I swept a large platter of crab cakes to the side, ignoring the gasps from the guests, and firmly placed my leather briefcase squarely in the center of the table. I popped the brass latches. The sharp metallic clicks sounded like gunshots in the dead silent room. I opened the briefcase. I did not rush. I took my time, enjoying the absolute, terrifying silence that had enveloped the room. I looked at Vanessa's father, a wealthy local car dealership owner who prided himself on his financial acumen. I looked at my father, who looked like he was about to experience a massive cardiac arrest. And finally, I looked at Brenda, whose face had gone completely, shockingly pale. You invited me here today to witness your victory, I said, looking directly at my mother. You thought you had outsmarted me. You thought you could use a fake cancer diagnosis to drag me back into your toxic web, force me to smile for the cameras, and legitimize this absolute farce of an engagement. But you made one critical, fatal miscalculation. I pulled a thick stack of legal documents from the briefcase and slammed them down onto the mahogany table. You completely underestimated exactly what I have been doing for the last 2 years. I continued, my voice steady, ringing with absolute certainty. While you were busy playing house and funding Wyatt's delusions of grandeur, I was building an empire. And today, I am going to show every single person in this room exactly how much your delusions actually cost. The trap of their complacency had officially been sprung. They had lived for so long in a world where actions had absolutely no consequences, insulated by Brenda's lies and Gregory's cowardice. They had no concept of the real world. They had no idea how the brutal mechanics of corporate finance and legal debt acquisition actually operated. They were about to receive a masterclass in total destruction. I stood at the head of the dining table, resting my hands flat against the polished wood, flanking the massive stack of legal documents. The entire room of 50 guests was entirely paralyzed. No one dared to take a sip of their champagne. No one dared to whisper. The air was electrically charged with the promise of utter devastation. For those of you who do not know, I addressed the crowd, my voice calm, projecting clearly. I am the Vice President of Regional Development for a major real estate and debt acquisition firm based out of Houston, Texas. My specific corporate mandate is to identify struggling regional banks, analyze their non-performing debt portfolios, and acquire their toxic assets for restructuring or immediate liquidation. I looked directly at Vanessa's father, Mr. Harrington. He was a businessman, I could see the exact moment the gears in his mind began to turn. His eyes widened slightly as the terrifying realization of what I was saying began to set in. 3 months ago, I continued, never breaking eye contact with Mr. Harrington, my firm finalized a massive acquisition of distressed assets from the primary regional bank here in this county. As a managing partner, I personally reviewed the ledgers, and I found something incredibly fascinating. I picked up the top document from the stack. It was a certified, notarized summary of financial liabilities. "Gregory," I said, addressing my father for the first time. He flinched visibly, clutching his glass of bourbon like a lifeline. "When was the last time you actually looked at the financial statements for this house? When was the last time you reviewed the equity?" My father swallowed hard, his face a sickening shade of gray. The house is paid off. We paid off the primary mortgage 5 years ago." "That is exactly what your wife told you," I replied, my voice ringing with brutal truth. I held the document up. "But that is a complete categorical lie. Over the last 4 years, Brenda has secretly taken out a massive secondary mortgage on this property. She forged your signature on the preliminary paperwork, utilized her power of attorney, and leveraged every single dime of equity this family possessed." The room collectively gasped. A low murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Gregory looked as if he had been physically struck with a baseball bat. He turned slowly to look at Brenda. "Brenda," Gregory whispered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Tell me he is lying. Tell me he fabricated these papers." Brenda was hyperventilating. Her chest was heaving, her perfectly styled hair suddenly looking completely disheveled. She lunged forward, trying to grab the papers from my hand. "Give me those. You have no right to access my private financial records. This is illegal." I easily stepped back, holding the papers out of her reach. "It is perfectly legal, Brenda, because my firm currently owns the debt. You are my client. Or rather, you are my debtor." I turned my attention back to the silent, horrified crowd. "She didn't just mortgage the house. She took out a $50,000 personal line of credit. She maxed out 6 different credit cards in Gregory's name." I pointed a firm finger directly at Wyatt, who was now standing frozen, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face. "And where did all that money go?" "It went to him. It went to fund his failed recording studio time. It went to pay off his multiple DUI legal fees. It went to buy that ridiculously expensive diamond ring on Vanessa's finger, because Wyatt hasn't held a paying job in 3 years." Vanessa instinctively covered her ring with her right hand, her face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. She looked at Wyatt with absolute terror. The comfortable, wealthy lifestyle she thought she had secured was rapidly dissolving into thin air right before her eyes. "Mr. Harrington," I called out, addressing Vanessa's father directly. I picked up a specific folder and slid it across the mahogany table toward him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping forward and opening it. "You pride yourself on your financial literacy. You are about to hand your daughter over to a man who is entirely insolvent. His mother has completely bankrupted this family to maintain the illusion of his success. The man standing next to your daughter is a financial black hole, and the second this house goes under, they will be coming to you to fund their lifestyle." Mr. Harrington aggressively scanned the documents. I watched his face transition from shock to absolute disbelief and finally to pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed the folder shut and turned a terrifying glare upon Brenda. "Is this true?" Mr. Harrington demanded, his voice booming through the room, vibrating with fury. "You sat in my living room last week and told me you were setting up a trust fund for the wedding. You told me you were paying for the catering in cash. You are completely bankrupt." Brenda burst into tears. It was not her usual calculated, manipulative crying. This was the raw, ugly, hyperventilating panic of a narcissist who has finally been cornered with undeniable empirical evidence. "I was going to fix it," she wailed, her hands pulling at her hair. "I was making investments. Wyatt's music was going to take off, he was going to get a record deal, and we were going to pay it all back. I did it for love. I did it to keep my family happy. You did it to maintain control. I corrected her, my voice slicing through her hysterical sobs like a scalpel. You sacrificed Dad's retirement. You sacrificed your home. And you sacrificed my mental health just to keep your golden child entirely dependent on you. Carter, please. Wyatt suddenly begged, his voice cracking, shedding the tough guy persona entirely. He looked like a terrified little boy. Bro, you can't do this. We can work this out. We can set up a payment plan. You have a lot of money now. You're rich. You can just forgive the debt. You can clear the books. For family. I looked at him with a level of disgust so profound it physically ached in my chest. Forgive the debt? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You slept in my bed with the woman I was going to marry. You laughed about it. You replaced me at the Thanksgiving table. You showed absolutely zero remorse, zero accountability, and zero loyalty. You are not my brother. You are a parasite. I turned to the rest of the room. The guests were absolutely mesmerized by the carnage, unable to look away from the horrific train wreck unfolding in the living room. As the majority stakeholder of the firm that holds this non-performing debt, I announced, my voice completely devoid of mercy, and due to the fact that these accounts have been severely delinquent for over 90 days, I have already authorized the legal department to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. The official eviction notices will be served by the county sheriff tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. My father collapsed into a dining chair, burying his face in his trembling hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing groan. Brenda shrieked, a horrific, guttural sound, dropping to her knees on the expensive hardwood floor, clawing at her own dress. You can't! She screamed, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. This is my home. I raised you in this home. You cannot put your own mother on the street. You made your choice the day you moved Vanessa into my bedroom, I said coldly. I meticulously packed the documents back into my leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. I looked at Vanessa. She was entirely separated from Wyatt now, standing near her angry parents. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, silently mouthing the word, sorry. It was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed. I strongly suggest you all enjoy the prime rib, I said to the silent, horrified crowd. It is the last meal this house will ever serve. I turned my back on the absolute chaos. I did not run. I walked at a measured, confident pace toward the front door. Behind me, the room erupted into pandemonium. I could hear Mr. Harrington screaming at Wyatt. I could hear Gregory sobbing. I could hear Brenda wailing my name. I opened the heavy front door, stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air, and closed the door firmly behind me, instantly cutting off the noise. I walked down the driveway to my midnight black Porsche 911. I slid into the driver's seat, the premium leather perfectly molding to my back. I inserted the key and turned the ignition. The powerful engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl of pure, unadulterated victory. As I drove away from the neighborhood, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror for the absolute final time, I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt a massive, suffocating weight lift off my chest. I had not just exposed them. I had legally, systematically dismantled the entire foundation of their toxic existence. I drove to an expensive hotel downtown, ordered a glass of 20-year-old scotch, stepped out onto the balcony, and breathed in the cold night air. The war was officially over, and I had won. The absolute destruction of my family's facade was spectacular, swift, and entirely public. In a wealthy suburban town where social currency and reputation dictate your standing in the community, the explosion at the engagement party was an extinction-level event. The carefully curated narrative Brenda had spent decades building evaporated overnight, replaced by the brutal, undeniable reality of public records and foreclosure notices. True to my word, the county sheriff arrived at the property exactly at 8 o'clock the next morning. The bright neon orange foreclosure notices were stapled to the heavy oak front door for the entire neighborhood to see. My father, Gregory, finally snapped out of his 30-year cowardice-induced coma. The sheer magnitude of the financial ruin, coupled with the profound public humiliation, broke the final thread of his subservience. He immediately hired an aggressive lawyer and filed for a highly contested divorce. He claimed extreme financial abuse, citing the forged documents and the secret secondary mortgages. Because the debt was accrued fraudulently without his consent, the legal battle was horrific. Gregory moved out that same week, renting a tiny, depressing one-bedroom apartment in a rundown industrial park on the edge of town. He sent me a long, rambling, tear-stained email begging for a meeting, begging for forgiveness, and pleading for financial assistance to pay his legal retainers. I read the email once, felt absolutely nothing, and dragged it directly to the trash bin. A man who stands idly by and silently watches his wife psychologically destroy his children to protect his own comfort deserves the absolute solitude he finds at the end of his life. Brenda's downfall was a masterpiece of karmic justice. She fought the foreclosure tooth and nail, representing herself in court because she had absolutely no money to hire a defense attorney. The judge, entirely unimpressed by her theatrical tears and manipulative monologues, ruled swiftly in my firm's favor. She was legally evicted from the property. With her credit score completely annihilated and her reputation in the community shattered, she lost her prestigious position on the HOA board. Her wealthy friends, entirely disgusted by the revelations of her fraudulent behavior and the sheer trashiness of the affair she facilitated, completely abandoned her. Through the persistent small-town grapevine, and specifically through updates from my sister Fiona, who had finally grown a spine, moved out of state and started therapy, I learned the ultimate fate of my mother. Brenda, the woman who used to turn her nose up at anyone driving a car older than 3 years, the woman who judged everyone's landscaping, was forced to take a minimum wage job. She was hired as a greeter at a massive Walmart in the next county over. The universe possesses a remarkably dark sense of humor. Wyatt and Vanessa's soulmate connection, unsurprisingly, could not survive the total absence of a funded bank account. The very second the financial pipeline from Brenda was violently severed, the romantic illusion completely disintegrated. Vanessa's wealthy parents immediately cut her off, entirely disgusted by the public humiliation she had dragged their family name through. They refused to pay for a wedding, refused to pay her rent, and demanded she return the leased car they provided. About 8 months after the engagement party, Fiona called me with an update that was so perfectly ironic I actually laughed out loud in my office. "Carter, you are not going to believe this," Fiona said, her voice a mix of shock and dark amusement. "Wyatt and Vanessa are completely done. It was a bloodbath. Did they run out of money for indie concert tickets?" I asked dryly, looking at a spreadsheet on my monitor. "Worse," Fiona replied. "Vanessa cheated on him. She got caught sleeping with Derek." Derek was Wyatt's absolute best friend. He was the guy who was supposed to be the best man at their heavily funded, fraudulent wedding. "But that is not even the kicker," Fiona continued, dropping her voice. "Vanessa is pregnant, and it is definitely Derek's kid. The same Vanessa who cried to you about wanting to build a traditional family is now pregnant with her fiancé's best friend's baby." The sheer, staggering hypocrisy was breathtaking. Vanessa had a clear, undeniable pattern. She was a parasitic opportunist who constantly traded up, or in this case, laterally, the second she felt bored or financially threatened. "What happened to Wyatt?" I asked, feeling a strange, clinical curiosity rather than any actual concern. "He completely lost his mind," Fiona explained. "He showed up drunk to the music store and started smashing equipment. He got fired on the spot and they pressed charges for property damage. He is facing another massive legal battle. He is currently living in a damp, unfinished basement in Brenda's new, crappy rental apartment. He just drinks cheap beer all day and writes incredibly depressing acoustic songs about how the world betrayed his artistic vision." Vanessa's teaching career also went up in flames. Once the scandalous details of her behavior, specifically, sleeping with the sibling of her fiancé and then sleeping with the best friend, circulated through the local school districts, no principal would touch her resume. She was deemed a massive liability with extremely poor moral judgment. Last I heard, she was working at a low-level call center, living with Derek in a cramped apartment, completely isolated from her former friends and her ashamed family. About a year after the massive confrontation, my real estate firm secured a highly lucrative contract to completely demolish and rebuild a large section of foreclosed residential properties in Colorado. It was part of a major gentrification project. The list of properties slated for immediate demolition included my childhood home. The house Brenda had leveraged to the hilt. The house where the ultimate betrayal occurred. I personally volunteered to oversee the initial demolition phase. I flew back to Colorado on a crisp Tuesday morning. I drove my Porsche 911 to the neighborhood, parking it safely on the curb across the street. I stood there in a tailored suit, holding a cup of hot coffee, and gave the foreman the official signal. I watched as the massive yellow excavator raised its hydraulic arm and smashed directly through the roof of my old bedroom, the exact room where my life had fallen apart. I watched the heavy machinery tear down the brick walls, shatter the expensive windows, and rip the pristine oak dining room to shreds. The physical structure that had housed decades of psychological abuse, manipulation, and deceit was systematically reduced to a pile of worthless rubble and splintered wood. Halfway through the demolition, a beat-up sedan pulled up to the end of the street. Brenda stepped out. Someone in the neighborhood must have tipped her off. She stood at the edge of the police barricade, wearing a cheap, faded uniform vest, looking incredibly old, haggard, and utterly broken. She watched the excavator crush the front porch. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, completely hollowed out, watching the final physical manifestation of her manufactured legacy turn to dust. I didn't walk over to her. I didn't offer a single word of consolation. I finished my coffee, turned my back on the rubble, got into my car, and drove directly to the airport. The purge was officially complete. I am sitting in my home office right now, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the sprawling Texas skyline. It has been over 3 years since I walked out of that horrific engagement party, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I do not feel the agonizing need to look over my shoulder. The suffocating weight of my family's expectations has been entirely lifted. I have learned a profound, life-altering lesson about boundaries over these last few years. Society heavily conditions us to believe that family is an unconditional bond. We are constantly fed this toxic narrative that blood is thicker than water, that you must forgive your parents because they did their best, and that cutting off a sibling is an unforgivable sin. I am here to tell you that narrative is a complete, absolute lie designed to keep victims trapped in cycles of abuse. I learned that a boundary is not an aggressive wall you build to punish people. It is a necessary, impenetrable gate you construct to keep your own soul safe. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries. You do not have to negotiate the terms of your mental health, and you certainly do not have to justify your distance to the very people who relentlessly try to cross those lines. If someone cannot fundamentally respect your boundaries, they have already made their choice. They have actively chosen to remain on the outside. I think back to Brenda, and I realize she never truly understood the concept of a person as an individual, autonomous human being. To her, her children were merely extensions of her own massive ego. We were tools for her to manipulate, chess pieces to arrange, or shiny trophies to display to the neighbors. She spent her entire existence desperately trying to control every variable. And in the end, she lost absolutely everything because she failed to comprehend a basic truth. You cannot own the people you claim to love. I think about Wyatt, and I realize with a cold clarity that he was a profound victim too. Not of my actions, but of Brenda's relentless, suffocating coddling. He never had the opportunity to develop the essential human resilience that comes from failing and standing back up. He never had to learn how to advocate for himself, how to endure hardship, or how to build something of actual value. He was kept in a warm, protective greenhouse his entire life, and the very second he was forced to face the harsh, freezing reality of the real world, he withered and died. And Vanessa was just a profoundly empty person who made a series of incredibly selfish, short-sighted choices. She was constantly looking for the easiest path, relying entirely on deceit, and realizing far too late that the easy path is often a permanent dead end. I have built a life now that feels incredibly authentic, grounded, and secure. I met a woman named Diana. Diana is an accomplished trauma surgeon. She is strong, fiercely independent, and possesses an unbreakable moral compass. She respects boundaries because she understands the absolute necessity of them. When she found out she was pregnant with our first child, Brenda somehow caught wind of the news through social media stalking. Brenda sent a box of my old baby clothes to our house with a long, manipulative letter about forgiveness and a child needing their grandmother. Diana didn't even ask me what to do. She opened the box, read the first line of the letter, marched outside, and threw the entire package directly into the trash bin. Then, she blocked every single account associated with my hometown. That is what a real partnership looks like. That is what genuine loyalty looks like. I do not live in a house that is heavily leveraged by lies and secret mortgages. I do not spend a single second of my day trying to manage other people's toxic expectations of me. I wake up, I go to a job that challenges and fulfills me. I surround myself exclusively with people who value me for who I actually am, and I go to sleep every single night with an entirely clear conscience. I did not lose a family. I actively amputated a gangrenous limb, and in doing so, I saved my own life. There is an incredible, profound freedom in knowing that you possess the absolute power to walk away from anything that is not true. Whether it is a toxic corporate job, a lying, unfaithful partner, or a blood family that refuses to respect your basic humanity, you are never, ever permanently trapped. You always, unconditionally, have the power to say no, to completely close the door, to change your phone number, and to start completely over. It is not an easy process. It is incredibly painful. It is deeply isolating, and there will be nights where you question your own sanity. The grief of mourning parents who are still alive is a very specific, agonizing type of pain. But it is the only guaranteed way to ensure that your life actually belongs to you. I see people every single day who are actively living their lives for other people. People who are sacrificing their own happiness to do what is culturally expected of them, who are suffering in absolute silence, who are deeply convinced that their inherent value is directly tied to how much abuse they can passively endure. If there is one absolute truth I have learned on this journey, it is that you do not get a shiny medal for suffering. You do not get a cosmic reward for being the bigger person when the other person is actively, maliciously trying to destroy your foundation. Sometimes, being the bigger person simply means walking away. Sometimes, it means having the courage to let the people who purposefully hurt you deal with the catastrophic consequences of their own choices, even if those choices ultimately lead to their absolute ruin. I have found deep, unshakable peace in that reality. I have found a profound purpose that is not defined by my financial utility to others. And I have found that the absolute best revenge is not the dramatic destruction of your enemies. It is the quiet, undeniable construction of your own massive happiness. I am sharing this story with you today not because I want your pity, and certainly not because I want you to hate my family the way I used to. I am sharing it because I want you to know with absolute certainty that your life is entirely your own. You get to define what the word family actually means. You get to define what respect looks like in your home. And you absolutely get to demand that the people in your life earn the privilege of the place they hold. Thank you for staying with me this far. You've truly shown me what it means to be heard. I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other in breaking these cycles. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, you are the architect of your own peace. Don't let anyone else lay the foundation.